back in the 1960s, the Cold War wasn't just fought with spies and politics. No, it was this high stakes, high tech rivalry that literally reached for the heavens. And this wasn't just about exploration, it was a flat out battle for prestige, for technological dominance, and really for the hearts and minds of the entire planet. So let's dive into the two completely different ways these superpowers tried to win the ultimate race to the moon.
So picture this. It's May 25th, 1961. President John F. Kennedy stands up in front of Congress and basically draws a line in the sand. He doesn't just suggest a mission, he commits the United States to what at the time seemed like an absolutely impossible goal. And what's so wild is that when he made this speech, America wasn't just behind in the space race. We were losing, and losing badly.
To really get the weight of Kennedy's challenge, you have to rewind to the early 1960s and feel the immense political pressure he was under. For his new administration, space wasn't some fun scientific curiosity. No, it was a critical front in the Cold War, and the United States was getting left in the dust. I mean, the difference between the two programs at this point was just stark. On April 12, 1961, the Soviets send Yuri Gagarin into a full orbit around the Earth. A month later, Alan Shepard becomes the first American in space, but his flight, it was just a 15-minute hop up and down. Some people called it a cannonball shot. The Soviet spacecraft weighed 5 times more than Shepard's. By pretty much every metric, the Soviets were way out in front. So Kennedy's decision was a direct response to this national crisis of confidence. April of 61 was just a devastating month for American prestige. First, you have Gagarin's incredible flight, and then just a few days later, the humiliating failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. Kennedy needed a big, bold move to restore America's credibility on the world stage. And the moon, that was it. Okay, so while America was gearing up for this massive, expensive Apollo program, the Soviets were playing a totally different game. They were focused on scoring more quick firsts. And they did this with their Voskhod program, which was, honestly, a clever but incredibly dangerous gamble designed to stay just one step ahead. To understand the kinds of risks they were willing to take, just look at how they launched the first multi-person crew. Soviet engineers took their one-man Vostok capsule, which was only about 8 feet wide, and they just ripped out the ejection seat. They then crammed 3 guys inside, without spacesuits, and with no escape system during launch. I mean, think about that. A single tiny leak in orbit would have been an instant death sentence. Historians who look back on this mission have called it, and this is without any exaggeration, the riskiest mission ever. It just shows you the immense pressure the Soviet program was under to keep their lead, no matter what the cost. Now, in complete contrast to the Soviets' corner-cutting, the American approach was this monumental mobilization of national will, money, and resources. Project Apollo wasn't about clever hacks. It was about overwhelming the challenge with pure industrial and financial power. Just the price tag alone was staggering, an estimated $20 billion in the 1960s. To put that in perspective, that's over $150 billion today. At its peak, the Apollo program was eating up over 5% of the entire federal budget and employed nearly 400,000 people. It was a massive undertaking. And a machine they built to pull it off was the Saturn V rocket. This thing was an absolute monster, standing 363 feet tall. That's taller than the Statue of Liberty. It is still the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown. This wasn't just some modified missile, it was an entirely new creation, a brute force solution to an immense engineering problem. But before a moon landing could even be attempted, there were more firsts to be won. And the next big prize was the first spacewalk. This milestone belongs to the Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, and it was a moment of pure triumph that almost ended in absolute disaster. So for 10 amazing minutes, Leonov is just floating in the void, the first human being to ever do so. But when he tried to get back inside, he discovered a terrifying problem. The vacuum of space had made his suit inflate and stiffen up like a balloon. He couldn't fit back through the airlock. He was trapped. With his heart racing, he made a desperate choice. He opened a valve and literally bled precious air out of his own suit, risking the bends just to make it flexible enough to squeeze back inside. He barely made it. And the ordeal wasn't even over. On re-entry, their navigation system failed, and they landed 600 miles off course in a remote frozen forest in Siberia, surrounded by wolves. It took rescue crews 2 full days to reach them, trekking through chest-deep snow. It was yet another narrow escape for the Soviet program. But this race to the moon wasn't a one-sided story of risk. The American program was about to pay its own terrible price. Ambition on this scale, well, it carried an enormous cost. And tragedy was about to strike, not in the vacuum of space, but right there on the launch pad. The date was January 27, 1967. The crew of what was supposed to be the very first Apollo mission was inside their capsule just doing a routine launch simulation. During the test, a fire broke out inside the command module. In the pure oxygen environment, it just spread instantly. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee were killed. NASA Administrator James Webb really captured the nation's shock, asking, "Who would have thought that the first tragedy would be on the ground?" The investigation found the cause. A spark from faulty wiring ignited flammable materials in that pure oxygen atmosphere. It was a recipe for disaster. But this devastating loss forced NASA to confront its own failures, and it led to a complete redesign of the Apollo capsule. They made it vastly safer, and that, ultimately, is what paved the way for the success that was still to come. After the fire, NASA regrouped, they redesigned, and they recommitted. And by the end of 1968, they were ready for the boldest move yet, a mission that would put the finish line of this long race tantalizingly within reach. On Christmas Eve 1968, the crew of Apollo 8 became the first human beings to ever leave Earth's orbit and circle the moon. As the entire world watched on television, they broadcast these incredible images of our fragile blue marble rising over the lunar horizon, and they read from the book of Genesis. It was this profoundly unifying and inspiring moment that really signaled that America had finally, decisively pulled ahead in the race. And then, just 7 months later, came the culmination of an entire decade of national effort. On July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 lunar module, the Eagle, touched down on the Sea of Tranquility. The impossible goal that Kennedy had set all those years ago was finally achieved. Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface and spoke those immortal words that were heard by hundreds of millions of people all across the globe. The race had been won. So, looking back on all this, how should we see it? Was it really just the ultimate product of Cold War division, a political stunt designed to prove who was better? Or, in its final, breathtaking moments, did it somehow become something more, one of humanity's greatest and most unifying achievements? That's a question really worth thinking about.